Happy 2021, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 2 of our 40,000 subscribers celebration. And no, this episode is not about asteroids or meteor crater, but still, I was left so changed by this experience, by seeing the enormity of the power of an asteroid collision, even a relatively small asteroid like the one that dug this crater, that I just had to show you this one last time and encourage you to watch this episode if you haven't already. It'll give you a different perspective on the dangers of asteroid collisions and how we need to change our perspective about protecting this planet from these future threats. But, of course, just about every space enthusiast on the planet is glued to every bit of information that they can find about SN9, the test flight scheduled to take place here in just a few days. And really, who can blame them, especially in the aftermath of the almost entirely successful SN8 test flight? Now, SN8 answered quite a few questions. First of all, in terms of the performance of the atmospheric Raptors, they seem to have done extremely well. If it wasn't for the pressure failure in the header tank, they might have done completely flawlessly as far as this flight was concerned. But there are a number of unanswered questions aside from the engines, aside from the landing, that SN8 did not answer and need to be answered before we move on with Starship's development. We now know that the belly flop maneuver works, that the aerodynamic properties of the Starship are capable of maneuvering it almost directly back to the launching pad, at least in our atmosphere. Quite a few things were answered by SN8. Nevertheless, there are still a number of unanswered questions that absolutely need to be resolved by SN9 or prototypes that come after it. And the sooner we get these questions answered, the better. What the hell am I talking about? Well, we're going to find out in just a few minutes. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Angry Astronaut. I have finally returned from Arizona. It was an eventful trip that I took with my son, Meteor Crater being the highlight of that particular trip. And as you may notice, I have a new mug. Now, does that mean that I've destroyed the Boeing mug in your absence or while you weren't looking? No, not at all. In typical Boeing fashion, there has been a slight delay in the planned launch, but everything's going to be rectified, I promise you. The main issue is I got back late on Saturday. Fireworks stores aren't open on Sunday, so the actual launch attempt will be taking place on Monday night. And yes, I did say launch and not destruction. We are going to try to make the Boeing mug fly with my limited knowledge of aeronautics and rocket science and all those other silly things that you need in order to make something fly. But I assure you, we are going to make this thing fly, and I can't wait to see it. Okay, so enough about that. SN9, while we're talking about something flying or something that we hope is going to fly. Well, I have every confidence, actually, that SN9 is going to fly. No question about that. SN8 was an immense success when it came to so many different aspects of the Starship's operation. When it came to achieving the desired altitude, well, you know, we pretty much knew that was going to happen as long as the atmospheric Raptors worked. But as far as the belly flop maneuver and as far as accurately landing the Starship just using the flaps and other aerodynamic properties of the vehicle with that kind of precision, almost directly back on the pad. That was something that a lot of people didn't expect. And even though, because of pressure issues in the header tank, which almost all of us know about, the Starship did not successfully land, but instead hit the ground at about 30 meters per second too fast, which would have destroyed anything that we tried to make fly. Nevertheless, the test was regarded by just about everybody as an immense success. So what's left with SN9? Is it just the landing? Is that the main issue that we've got to focus on? And as long as SN9 sticks the landing, then we're on our way to Mars? Well, no. No, there's a lot of things actually that SN9 needs to accomplish that SN8 did not. And it makes this particular test very, very critical, because if it doesn't accomplish all of these things, then we have to accomplish them with SN10 or perhaps SN11. And the longer it takes us to check off these little boxes on the Starship's development, the longer it's going to take for the Starship to reach orbit and then go to places beyond that. So SN9 is important. If the test is a complete success and it manages to land successfully, then we are on our way to bigger and brighter things at a very rapid pace. If it does not, then we've still got some waiting to do, although I have every confidence that it's still going to work. Still, there are some things that SN9 is not going to answer. Some aspects of the Starship's development, critical aspects, that SN9 simply will not answer, and neither will SN10 or SN11. We've got a ways to go on a number of things when it comes to the Starship's development. So I'm going to cover the things that SN9 hopefully will demonstrate to us and what it will not right now. Who could forget this moment? And yet, SN9, just a few months after this cataclysmic explosion, has answered some questions already in terms of SpaceX's confidence with their fuel tanks under cryogenic pressure tests. They already have all of the engines attached to the vehicle while they've been carrying out these particular tests. They never, ever would have taken these kinds of chances in the past with their very expensive Raptors attached to the vehicle. Clearly, SpaceX has resolved just about every issue with the tanks on their vehicles, or at least it certainly appears that way with how they're handling SN9. And by the way, these images, as you can see, are as a result of the long-standing generosity of Boca Chica Gal and NASA Spaceflight. Thank you so much, and please go over to her channel and subscribe. But here's a question that is being hotly debated on social media and has yet to be answered, and perhaps SN9 will. Why didn't the landing gear deploy at all during the landing attempt? The legs didn't even start to come out. The explanation that I find the most compelling is that the conditions necessary to deploy the landing legs were not reached, and since all of this was automated, these conditions had to be met before the legs would start to come out, and these conditions being both altitude and velocity. And since the ship was coming down entirely too fast, that would explain why the legs wouldn't have automatically deployed. So this will be SN9's first major challenge, demonstrating that even with proper header tank pressure, the two engines that will relight will reduce Starship's speed significantly enough and fast enough for the landing gear to deploy and to land this very tall and perhaps top-heavy vehicle successfully. And that's going to be a major challenge in itself. But here already is a question that SN9 is not going to answer. How is the landing gear going to perform when it's landing not on a perfectly flat landing pad, but on uneven terrain such as on Mars? Even the flattest terrain on Mars is still going to be very different than a landing pad, and that is something that's going to have to be answered in the future. Okay, so we all knew that SN9 needs to stick the landing in order to be considered an unqualified success, but what about other aspects? Well, first of all, we mustn't forget the heat shield, and yes, SN9 has a patch of heat tiles attached, and these are absolutely crucial to determine how well the Starship's heat shield is going to hold up under real-life circumstances. Now granted, these reusable tiles are not going to experience the heat of re-entry. However, they are going to experience the stresses of takeoff, landing, the belly flop maneuver, pretty much everything else that the Starship is going to go through. How well are they going to stay attached? Are they going to crack under the pressure? These questions need to be answered before the Starship can move on to bigger and better things. Now, another critical question that SN9 is unlikely to answer is the question of rapid reusability, which Elon Musk has stressed time and again is absolutely vital to the success of Starship. If SN9 manages to stick the landing perfectly, are they going to attempt to reuse this vehicle? I find it unlikely because SpaceX is probably going to be checking SN9 over with a fine-tooth comb after the landing to see how the ship performed. However, if the Starship is to perform as promised and the future that we're looking at right now is to become a reality, then some future prototype of the Starship is going to have to fly again after landing, and fly again very soon. And in my opinion, the sooner we attempt to reuse a prototype of the Starship, the better. Now, if we can return to the landing for a moment, one thing that I was very pleased about with SN8 was the fact that SpaceX attempted to perform this last-second flip-turn maneuver to land the Starship. This, by the way, was unnecessary. They don't land their Falcon 9 boosters this way, but the reason they did it with the Starship was because of how the Starship is going to need to land on Mars. As I've mentioned in the past, assuming that the Starship receives about 5 refuelings in low Earth orbit from tankers, the vessel will be running on fumes and fuel will be at a premium by the time it reaches Mars. As a result, the Starship must take maximum advantage of the Martian atmosphere, which by the way becomes significantly more dense, very close to the surface. So the Starship must delay engaging its engines and attempting a braking maneuver until the last possible moment. And this has been the plan for quite some time, which is why the Starship is executing this maneuver so close to the ground. And this, by the way, is one of the key reasons that SpaceX has chosen the locations that they have for their first landing sites. The altitude of these locations on Mars is particularly low, and therefore the atmosphere being significantly more dense. Of course, there are other reasons as well. The terrain is relatively flat, there's a high probability of water, and greater protection from radiation. But nevertheless, the density of the Martian atmosphere is going to be absolutely crucial to the Starship's ability to land on the red planet, and a last-second flip turn is the only conceivable way that the Starship could land on the Martian surface without crashing. So if the Starship is to become a reliable form of transport, especially for human beings to the red planet, it must be able to carry out these sort of flip-turn landing maneuvers without fail time and again, especially on Earth where we have the luxury of an atmosphere that's 100 times more dense than that on Mars. It's actually more than that, really. However, as I've mentioned a number of times before, even if SN9 and subsequent versions of the Starship are able to successfully stick this maneuver and carry out the flip turn perfectly, it's still not going to tell us how well it's going to be able to do this in an atmosphere as thin as the red planet's. If we return to the SpaceX simulation, we can see that they actually did a pretty good job of simulating how fast the Starship was going to descend in Earth's atmosphere, about 245 kilometers per hour, or terminal velocity in our atmosphere. On Mars, that velocity is going to increase at least threefold and possibly as much as fourfold. Is the same flip turn going to work under those kind of conditions and that kind of speed? We don't know, and SN9 is certainly not going to show us. Now, Elon Musk has cryptically referred to some radical changes that are going to be made to SN15. Perhaps these changes are going to demonstrate how the Starship is going to significantly reduce its atmospheric velocity, especially in the Martian re-entry. However, if it does not, then we may have to wait until this precise moment when the Starship sets down on Mars to determine just how viable the flip-turn landing actually is. And no, I'm not suggesting that we test it for the first time on humans, but if we want this moment to become a reality, then we need to deal with this elephant in the room at some point. And by the way, NASA is also working very hard on getting humans to Mars, and they have a very innovative solution to this problem called ADEPT, which is a combination aeroshell and inflatable heat shield, providing both protection from the heat of re-entry and also a tremendous amount of atmospheric drag. Now, I for one can't imagine how a system like this could possibly be used on the Starship, especially during a belly flop maneuver, but at the same time, if Elon wants to avoid the 1,000-kilometer-an-hour terminal velocity that Mars happens to have, that has been the bane of so many missions in the past, then a solution like this might be a good thing to look at. And for all we know, SpaceX is already looking at it. But sadly, the SN9 test is not going to answer that question. So when SN9 takes to the skies in the next few days, a number of key questions are hopefully going to be answered. Is the landing gear going to perform as promised? Is the flip turn a viable solution for landing this huge beast? Are the heat tiles going to remain intact and attached? So many key questions that all have to be answered in the affirmative if we hope to move forward with this ship, and yet so many other questions that won't be answered. And by the way, I haven't even mentioned the Super Heavy. So let's hope for the best, because no matter what, we can expect a hell of a show. So, a lot of things coming in the next few days. I wish SN9 the best of luck, and SpaceX, of course, and all of the people who have been working so hard to make Elon Musk's dream a reality. And not just his dream, but the dream of millions of space enthusiasts across the planet now. I mean, we are wholly invested in this ship. Far more than any other ship really in human history. Granted, the Saturn V was a massive, colossal moment in human history. But as far as mankind spreading out into the solar system, the Starship is undoubtedly the best vessel to accomplish this, and really the only one that is currently being worked on. And therefore, we've got millions and millions of people completely invested in whether this ship can accomplish what it's meant to accomplish, or if it doesn't. And I'll tell you, there's a lot riding on this. SpaceX's entire future is riding on this. Now, granted, if SpaceX can never really make this thing land on Mars, and we have to face that possibility, the Starship is a huge vehicle, far heavier than anything we have ever attempted to land on the red planet. It could be that we simply cannot come up with a scenario to make this work in an atmosphere that's 1% as dense as ours, actually less than that. You know, we may have to come up with more radical solutions than what SpaceX is looking at right now. We won't know until we actually attempt it. But even if that isn't accomplished, the Starship is still going to represent by far the least expensive way per kilogram of getting things into low Earth orbit and beyond. So even if it comes down to us having to build an entirely different ship in orbit or something else in order to effectively colonize the red planet, the Starship is going to make that possible, whereas in prior days, it simply hasn't been. And that is a monumental achievement, regardless of what happens in the Starship's future. So a lot still to come with this ship, and number of very exciting years in front of us, at least for those of us who are excited about these sorts of things. And I hope that that number grows as time goes on. So I appreciate you folks sticking with me. 40,000 subscribers. My next episode will have the climax of the 40,000 subscribers celebration. We started out, of course, with my video on asteroids, then this one, and then the third video. And I'll be, of course, revealing the topic of that video very, very soon. So get ready for an explosive moment. And if you want to continue to support this channel, to continue supporting my ability to, keep pumping out this content that you folks seem to like, and I'm so glad and honored and humbled that you folks do, then go to the description. There are a lot of different ways to support me. And the whole YouTube monetization thing, I continue to learn that it's very, very fickle. And without your support, I simply wouldn't be here talking to you right now. So thank you. Thank you so much for everything. So until SN9 takes to the skies and hopefully accomplishes everything that SpaceX has set out for it to do, or if it does not, until we actually accomplish everything that SN9 is supposed to accomplish and move on to the next stages of Starship development and man's ultimate exploration of the solar system, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.